Well, I'm not close to the IMO, but my opinion is that as an industry, we can't leave legislation to other people. And irrespective of how long it takes to get legislation through the IMO, we must, through our associations, through our country associations, we must remain engaged. But at the end of the day, legislation is only as good as its implementation on board the ships and within the industry. So we've got a lot of legislation. Let's start looking at education. How do we get it properly and effectively implemented?
My opinion of the IMO is that it's a fantastic organisation. It does wonderful work, and it's to be commended for that. If there is any criticism, it can only be in the speed with which many of the conventions that are important, the speed with which they are ratified and brought into effect. A lot of valuable time is lost in the ratification process, and it would be helpful if more work can be done there. In this respect, I'm thinking of I think there's an IMO resolution on pilot standards of qualification and training, which is still only advisory, not mandatory. I think a lot of ship owners are concerned about the frequency of casualties happening as a result of pilot error, and there's often dismay that the pilots to whom they rely on guidance are not subject to the same levels of training and certification as their own watchkeepers.
Effective implementation. As I said in my presentations, we have rules, plenty of them. We have to revisit our requirements. We have to seek for simplification. IMO must focus on paperwork that we have created. We must ask legislators to reduce the workload on board ships. We must emphasize seamanship and how we will gain seamanship and proper training.
We need to ensure that the conventions to be adopted are easy to implement, practical and cost-effective. And we need also to ensure that human element considerations are included in the IMO conventions to be adopted.
Indeed, we have enough. We learn to effectively implement what we have, but if I may add one or two items, I will say to us it's also important that the IMO mandatory audit scheme for flag states is also bring an important additional safety pin in the puzzle of stakeholders. So this effective implementation of the audit and also adaptation of the findings of its flag, port or coastal state is also very important.
Well, effective implementation, yes, it has improved, but if we look at posted control, for example, results, we can see that there are still a number of ships and ship managers which need to improve to fully implement all the regulations which are enforced today. We are on the good track, but the effort is not terminated, is not finished.
This is a very good story, but of course, the American government has to be more cooperative with the rest of the world.
The IMO is trying very hard, and it is working well, but we're getting too much legislation. Effective implementation, it sounds very good, but for every effective implementation, there is a cost factor. And the more legislation we throw at the industry, the greater the costs. And at this time when the industry is struggling with freight rates being down, increase in construction, it's very difficult for companies to meet. If we look at certain conventions, the MLC 2006 didn't get ratified to 2013. The Ballast Water Management Convention has still not been ratified. It's been about since the late 90s. We have to make sure that there's a balance, but also the redress is to remove old and obsolete legislation and reduce it so that the shipping industry can operate effectively, safely and environmentally friendly way.
I see a lot of challenges coming. I think the ever-growing regulatory burden being placed on ship owners is going to be a huge challenge. Finding seafarers that are qualified and training them up, and maintaining the excessive documentation that's required to demonstrate compliance. I think there's a long way to go in the effective implementation. I think the consistency among port states is critically important to ensure a level playing field for ship owners.
I think that it was a very interesting topic and obviously a hot topic. We also spoke about that today. For us, the most interesting convention upcoming is the Nairobi Convention, and that is discussing having larger insurances for wreck removal that are actually mandatory in different regions. Right now, there isn't a mandatory wreck removal insurance. We'll see what happens for us in the United States, as we tend to reject these certain sort of conventions and have our own acts. But I think it's a very positive thing, especially for the P&I clubs, as we see the escalating cost of wreck removal getting quite out of hand, especially because of state and authority intervention.
I mean, with the new initiative of the IMO implementation of Convention Code and the IMO audit scheme, there might be made some progress, but IMO have a tendency of over-regulating.
I don't think we're doing enough. IMO conventions take too long to enter into force. I think what the industry needs is a quality regulatory framework of universal application rather than screeds of legislation, some of which applies in one country, some of which applies in another. I think a big step forward will be if our American friends signed up to some of these international conventions for a change.